The moment the divorce papers were signed, I made a swift decision, one that would alter the entire course of the Sterling family's carefully crafted world. I dialed my father in silence, my hands trembling slightly as I transferred every penny out of the company's account. Meanwhile, my ex-mother-in-law, Beverly, was still boasting loudly on her phone, sharing the good news of Marcus's newfound wealth with her country club friends. She was already planning how she would use the spoils to upgrade her lifestyle, so sure of her victory. The next morning, Beverly strutted into the bank, her oversized sunglasses hiding the smirk on her face. She demanded a large withdrawal for a down payment on the luxury estate she had been eyeing. The teller, however, couldn't process the transaction. "Ma'am," she stammered, "this account is empty." Beverly's confident air faltered, the weight of her newfound poverty crashing down on her. I couldn't help but find a small thrill in watching her downfall. My name is Nia, and at 32, I was no longer the woman who silently supported her husband's ambitions. I had spent 3 years being the perfect, docile wife, all the while watching as Marcus leaned back in his leather chair at the office, playing CEO in name only. He spent more time texting his young assistant than managing the company he had inherited. And behind him, Beverly in her designer suit, always there to remind me how inferior I was to her legacy. The day of the divorce was no different. They sat there, smug and unbothered, as Marcus signed the final papers without even sparing me a glance. "You can finally breathe again, Marcus," Beverly purred, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She was savoring this moment, believing she had won. But little did she know, I had already made my move. The marriage had ended, but I was far from finished with the Sterling family. I slid the paperwork toward the mediator, stood up, and left the room without uttering a word. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and tapped the contact name, Elias Harrison, my father. Unlike Marcus's family, whose wealth was only a facade, my father's wealth was quiet yet immense. He had built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up. When I called him that day, I knew I was about to execute my plan. "It's done, Dad," I said, steadying my breath. "The papers are signed." "Did they give you trouble?" he asked, his voice as calm as ever. "Beverly's already planning a victory gala," I replied. He chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Let them have their celebration," he said. "You ready?" I nodded, standing firm. "Activate Clause 4B. Pull the capital. Every last cent." It was over. Beverly, Marcus, and their gleaming public image had no idea what was about to hit them. The quiet end to my marriage was the beginning of the real game, and as the day went on, I watched their celebration crumble as their financial foundation fell apart. But the game was far from over. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., Beverly would walk into the bank expecting to complete her transaction, only to be faced with a reality she wasn't prepared for. The next morning, Beverly walked into the Chase Bank with that same arrogant stride, the one that said she owned the world. She was all smiles, still high off the thought of her new estate, probably already planning what color curtains would match her brand new life. She didn't even know her world was about to get flipped upside down. Beverly bypassed the regular line like she always did. She was used to walking straight up to the premium banking desk, acting like the world was at her feet. "Hurry it up, dear," she snapped at the teller, her sunglasses still on, inside, of course. "I'm Marcus Sterling's mother, and we have a very busy day ahead of us." The teller, a sweet girl named Sarah, smiled nervously, doing her job. But when she typed in the account number, I could almost hear the pin drop. Her eyes widened and she looked up, her voice shaky. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but this account has been completely emptied. There's no money in it." Beverly's face drained of color faster than a popsicle on a hot summer day. The blood left her face, and her usual pride melted into confusion and disbelief. "Excuse me?" she managed, trying to hold it together. "There's over $4.5 million in that account," she insisted. Sarah didn't back down. "No, ma'am," she replied softly. "A legal withdrawal was processed yesterday by the primary trust holder. The balance is $0. Beverly's jaw dropped. She didn't know what to say. Her whole world, her shiny, perfect world, came crashing down right in front of her. Meanwhile, I was sitting in my penthouse watching the whole thing unfold from my couch. I had my coffee in hand, a smug smile pulling at my lips as I let them crash and burn. The Sterlings thought they had outsmarted me, but they didn't even know the game had just started. You see, my father's trust had been my secret weapon all along. He'd built an empire quietly, and he'd made sure I understood how to hold on to every dollar we had. While Marcus was too busy playing CEO and forgetting about real work, I was quietly pulling strings in the background. Marcus had always been a man who thought his name alone could keep him afloat. But here's the kicker. His name didn't mean squat without my dad's money propping it up. And now, with one phone call, I had pulled it all out from under him. Bye-bye fancy suits and rented sports cars. He was about to lose it all. After I heard Beverly's pathetic little meltdown, I pulled my phone out and made the call that would seal their fate. "It's done, Dad," I said. "The papers are signed." "Did they give you any trouble?" he asked, his voice like steady rock. "Just the usual speeches about their superiority," I said, shaking my head. "Beverly's already planning a victory gala." He chuckled darkly. "Let them party. Are you ready for the next step?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, smirking. "I'm ready." "Activate Clause 4B. Pull every last cent." I hung up, taking a long sip of my coffee, my eyes already scanning the paperwork for the next phase of my plan. Clause 4B was something my dad had insisted on when he fronted the initial $4.5 million for Sterling Public Relations. The company wasn't Marcus's, not really. The Sterling name was just the title, and I was the one pulling all the financial strings from the shadows. Now that the marriage was over, the trust had every right to pull the capital out, and that's exactly what I did. That was only the beginning. Beverly might have been celebrating, but what came next would change the game forever. The next morning, like clockwork, Beverly marched into the bank all prim and proper, wearing those ridiculous sunglasses indoors like she was some kind of VIP. She didn't even bother to acknowledge the regular people in line. As usual, she made a beeline straight for the premium desk. It was obvious she had no idea what was coming for her. "I need $200,000 in a cashier's check," she demanded, slapping the withdrawal slip down on the counter, "to put down on my new place." She practically waved her hand like she owned the place. The young teller, Sarah, hesitated for a moment before typing in the account number. I could practically feel Beverly's smugness radiating from across the room. But then the dreaded moment hit. Sarah's eyes went wide, and she stammered, "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but there's no money in the account. It's been emptied." Beverly looked like she'd just been slapped in the face. "What do you mean, emptied?" she snapped, her voice trembling with confusion. "My son Marcus is the CEO. There's millions in that account. Are you telling me I can't access my own money?" "I'm sorry, ma'am," Sarah said, clearly uncomfortable. "A legal withdrawal was processed yesterday. The account balance is now $0. Beverly's perfectly painted face drained of color. She reached out to grab the desk like it was going to hold her up, but the truth had already hit her hard. She was dead broke. Back in my penthouse, I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the whole thing unfold. My moment of satisfaction was bittersweet, though. I had been planning this for months, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and now that it was happening, all I could feel was a calm, almost detached sense of justice. The Sterlings never knew what hit them. They thought they were on top, that they were untouchable. But all that luxury, all that legacy was built on borrowed time, and now it was about to come crumbling down. I leaned back on the couch and pulled out my phone again. It was time to make sure they got the message. I scrolled to Elias Harrison's contact and tapped it. "It's done, Dad," I said when he picked up. "She tried to get the money, but it's all gone." "Good. Now let's finish this." I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the background as I let the weight of the moment sink in. "It's about to get interesting," I said, smirking as I placed my phone down on the table. The thing about Marcus and Beverly was that they were predictable. They never saw me coming. They thought I was the weak link, the one who would crumble under their pressure. They underestimated me. They thought I was just the quiet wife who played the supportive role. They had no idea that I was the one holding all the strings, and now I was pulling them tight. But it wasn't enough to just let them fall apart quietly. No, I needed to make sure that they felt it, the sting of their own arrogance. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about showing them that the Sterling name wasn't worth a damn thing without the power behind it. And now I had that power. I tapped my fingers on the armrest, waiting for the next step. They would come running to me eventually. They always did. And when they did, I would be ready. Little did they know, this wasn't over. The real chaos had just begun, and I was about to take it to the next level. The next few days felt like a strange calm before the storm. I stayed in my penthouse, enjoying the quiet luxury of it all, while the Sterlings scrambled to pick up the pieces of their shattered world. Beverly, Marcus, and their whole crew were trying to figure out how they could spin this mess into something they could control. But I could see the writing on the wall. They were out of their depth. They had no idea what was coming. I spent my days getting everything in order, shoring up my finances, double-checking the trust documents, and making sure all my legal ducks were in a row. I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard. This was my game now, and I was playing it by my rules. But then I started hearing whispers. They were talking, the Sterlings. All their friends from the country club, their business connections, even some of the media types they liked to schmooze with were starting to ask questions. And where there were questions, there would be answers. I could practically feel the pressure building. The Sterlings weren't just going to let it go. They needed to save face. Beverly, in particular, couldn't stand the thought of being humiliated like this. I could already imagine her fuming in her overpriced suburban villa, trying to think of some way to turn the tide in her favor. One afternoon, as I sat in my living room, I got a text from my lawyer. It was brief, straight to the point. They filed for an emergency injunction. They're coming after the penthouse. I smirked and set my phone down. Of course they were. They didn't know how to let things go. It was all about winning, about putting on a show for the world, even when the cards weren't in their favor. But they had no idea who they were dealing with now. They thought they could bully me into submission. They thought that just because I had been the quiet, supportive wife, I'd roll over and give them whatever they wanted. Well, guess what? The tables had turned. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the deep red taste as I leaned back in my chair. They were getting desperate. Beverly was probably already on the phone with some high-powered attorney trying to figure out how to make me give up the penthouse without making a scene. But I wasn't going to make this easy. I wasn't going to fold just because they wanted me to. I had everything I needed to shut them down. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every scrap of evidence I'd meticulously gathered in the past few weeks was ready to go. All I had to do was pull the trigger at the right moment, and that moment was coming. I could feel the tension in the air, thick like smoke before a fire. The Sterlings were about to realize that no matter how much money or influence they had, they couldn't outrun the truth, and the truth was coming for them. Fast. The next day, the phone call started. Beverly, of course, was the first to reach out. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. The moment I picked up, her voice came at me like a freight train. "You have no idea what you've done, Nia. You've ruined everything. My son worked his ass off for that company. You don't have the right to take it all away from him. You don't deserve anything." I could hear the crack in her voice, the desperation creeping in. She was used to being in control, and now she was losing it all. It was hard to feel sorry for her. "Beverly, I've been more than generous. I've kept your dirty little secrets long enough. But now it's time for you to face the consequences. You've built your life on lies, and it's all coming crashing down." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought she might actually shut up and listen. But no, Beverly wasn't the type to back down. "You think you've won, don't you? You think you're some kind of hero for taking what's ours, but you're not. You're just a gold-digging fraud who's about to lose everything." I smiled to myself, knowing she was just spinning her wheels. She had no idea what was coming next. She had no idea what kind of trap I was setting. But little did Beverly know, the real trap was still waiting to be sprung, and this time there would be no escape for her or her precious Sterling family. After Beverly's angry phone call, things were quiet for a while, but I could feel the pressure building. I knew they were working on their next move, trying to find some way to turn the tables and keep their luxury lifestyle intact. They still didn't understand the full extent of what I'd done. They thought they could still force me into some settlement, some compromise. But I wasn't about to roll over and let them win. Not after everything I'd been through. They had underestimated me, thinking I was just the quiet wife in the background. But what they didn't know was that I had been playing my cards from the start. I spent the next few days meticulously preparing. My lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, was all over it, handling the paperwork and ensuring everything was in place for when the Sterlings finally came knocking. I didn't need to move quickly. I needed to move smart. Meanwhile, Beverly was out there making her rounds. She knew I had every right to the penthouse, but she couldn't stand the idea of me winning. She was probably still scheming, trying to find some way to spin the situation in her favor. I couldn't wait to see what she came up with next. Then one morning I got a call from Mr. Caldwell. "They filed for an emergency injunction," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "They're asking the court to freeze your assets and force you to give up the penthouse." I couldn't help but laugh a little. It wasn't even the first time they tried this. I had expected it, honestly. They didn't have anything else left to try. They had no leverage, no bargaining chip, except their pathetic, fading reputation. "Let them try," I said calmly, sitting back in my chair. "They've got nothing. We've got everything. Just wait." I hung up, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Beverly, Marcus, and the rest of the Sterling clan thought they could just bulldoze their way through life, relying on their name, their social connections, and their fake wealth. They had no idea what I was capable of, how much I had already prepared. The truth was, they had lost. They just hadn't figured it out yet. I spent the rest of the day sorting through paperwork, checking the final details on the financial documents I had gathered, and making sure everything was airtight. I was ready to take this to court if I had to, but I wasn't in any hurry. I wasn't about to let them rush me into a settlement they thought they could control. As the days passed, I could feel the tension start to build again. The Sterlings had always been a family of drama. They thrived on chaos, on conflict, on the constant need for attention. But the real chaos was just about to hit, and I was going to make sure they felt every single second of it. I wasn't just going to fight for the penthouse, I was going to fight for my life, for everything I had built, and for the person I had become. I wasn't going to let them take it all away from me, not without a fight. The media was starting to buzz again, with whispers of a possible court battle, of my highly contested divorce making headlines. But what they didn't know was that I had already won. It was only a matter of time before they realized it. The trap I had set was slowly tightening, and soon enough, they would all be caught in it. A few days after the emergency injunction was filed, the tension was palpable. The air felt thick, like something was just waiting to explode. The Sterlings were running around like headless chickens, trying to salvage whatever they could from the wreckage of their empire. They were still convinced that they could outsmart me, that I'd cave and give them what they wanted, but I wasn't that easy. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my lawyer, from the media, from people trying to get a scoop. Beverly, Marcus, and their entire circus had turned up the volume, trying to paint me as the villain, trying to get the public to believe their narrative. They thought they could manipulate the story in their favor. But what they didn't know was that I had already started rewriting the script. By the time the court hearing came around, I was calm, completely unbothered. I had everything in order, all the paperwork, all the proof, all the damning evidence to back up my position. I knew that Marcus and Beverly would show up with their usual theatrics, playing the part of the betrayed, innocent victims. They had no idea how badly they were about to get blindsided. I was ready. But I wasn't going to be the one making the first move. I knew how to play this game, and the first rule was always to let the other side overplay their hand. The day of the hearing arrived. I arrived at the courthouse a bit earlier than usual. My attorney, Mr. Caldwell, met me in the lobby, his face a mask of professionalism. He looked calm, like everything was under control, but I could tell he was impressed with how well I'd handled everything up until now. He knew what was coming. "Everything's set," he said, handing me the stack of documents. "We've got everything we need to bury them in there today." I smiled and nodded, scanning the stack. The truth was, I didn't need to fight fire with fire. I wasn't going to sink to their level of petty drama. I just needed to let the truth speak for itself. They had lied, they had manipulated, they had stolen, and now it was time for them to pay. When the hearing finally started, the courtroom was packed with their people, journalists, family friends, even a few of their high society cronies. They were all there to watch the drama unfold, to see who would come out on top in this little war. Beverly was sitting front and center, trying to look as dignified as possible, but you could see the cracks in her carefully crafted facade. Her eyes kept darting around nervously. Marcus sat beside her, his usual smirk gone. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. And then there was me, sitting quietly in my chair, my posture impeccable, my expression serene. I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to yell or point fingers. I was playing the long game, and I knew how to win it. The judge called the court to order, and the room quieted down. Marcus and Beverly's attorney began their spiel, talking about how I had wrongfully taken the penthouse, how I had stolen everything from them. They were trying to play the sympathy card, painting me as the cold, heartless ex-wife who was trying to strip them of everything they had. It was the same song and dance I had heard 100 times before. But this time there was a difference. I stood up when it was my turn, calm as ever, and walked over to the table where my evidence was neatly laid out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw around accusations. I simply started presenting the facts, one by one, laying out the complete picture of what had happened. The bank statements, the wire transfers, the offshore accounts. I showed how Marcus had been siphoning funds from the company for months, how they had used the company's money to prop up their fake image, all while playing the victim. As I laid it all out, the room grew tense. Marcus's face went white. Beverly shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands clenched so tight around her designer purse that her knuckles turned white. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the pages turning as I presented more and more evidence. When I finished, I looked up at the judge and then at Marcus and Beverly, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. I wasn't the one on trial here. They were, and they knew it. As the judge deliberated, I could feel their world crumbling. They thought they were invincible, but I was about to show them that they were nothing without the lies they'd built their lives on. The judge took his time deliberating, and for a moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. I could see the tension etched on Marcus and Beverly's faces as they waited for the verdict. They were trying so hard to look composed, but their nervous energy was like a fire, barely contained. Beverly kept glancing at her phone, likely hoping for some miracle to save them. Marcus was twitchy, his fingers drumming against the table as he avoided making eye contact with anyone. And I just sat there, watching them squirm, feeling a little satisfaction bubble up in me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. They had thought they could manipulate me, that they could walk all over me. But now the truth was in front of everyone, and they had no choice but to face it. The judge finally spoke, his voice firm and unyielding. I've reviewed the evidence, and I must say the facts presented here are clear. The actions taken by the defendant, Marcus Sterling, and his family have been highly questionable at best and outright fraudulent at worst. I have no choice but to rule in favor of the plaintiff, Nia Harrison. A wave of shock washed over the room. Beverly's face turned crimson, her mouth hanging open as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Marcus, who had been sitting up straight with a smug look earlier, was now slouched in his seat, his face pale and devoid of all confidence. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am ordering a full forensic audit of Sterling Public Relations. All assets are to be frozen pending investigation, and the defendants are prohibited from accessing any company funds until the audit is complete. Any illegal transfers will be subject to further legal action. There it was. The hammer came down hard, and they were crushed by it. I could see the realization hit Marcus, his mind racing to find a way out, to wriggle out of the mess he had made. But it was too late. The damage was done. I stood up and walked out of the courtroom slowly, savoring the moment. There was no need to gloat. I had won. I didn't need to shout or make a scene. The look on Beverly's face was enough. She was used to controlling the narrative, but now the tables had turned, and she had nothing left to hold on to. As I stepped outside the courthouse, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The weight of everything that had been building up in my life these past few months finally lifted. The Sterlings had thought they could tear me down. They thought I was just a quiet, naive woman who would bend to their will. But they didn't know who they were messing with. For the next few days, the media went wild. News outlets reported the story, spinning it as a dramatic tale of betrayal and corporate fraud. Beverly and Marcus, the once touted power couple of Atlanta's elite, were now a spectacle. Their fall from grace was swift and brutal, and I had made sure to be at the center of it all, watching them crumble. But the best part? They didn't see it coming. They thought they had me trapped in their web of lies, but it was them who were caught in the snare of their own making. And now, with everything exposed, their so-called empire was starting to unravel, piece by piece. I wasn't done yet, though. This was just the beginning. I was going to make sure they paid for everything they'd taken from me, for every insult, every lie, every moment they tried to break me. The real fun, though, that was about to start. Marcus, Beverly, and the rest of their crew had no idea what was coming next, and I was about to take them all down, one by one. The weeks after the ruling felt like a weird mix of victory and calm before the storm. The Sterlings, once so proud and untouchable, were now a punchline, their world completely shattered. Marcus and Beverly did their best to spin the narrative, but the truth had already been laid bare for all to see. And it wasn't just the media that was watching. Business partners, high society connections, even their so-called friends, all of them were starting to distance themselves. The Sterlings had lost their power, and no amount of money or fancy dinners could buy it back. I stayed quiet through it all, letting the storm swirl around them. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from former clients and media outlets wanting a statement, wanting to hear my side of the story. I didn't need to speak. The evidence spoke for itself, and my silence only made it louder. But even in the middle of all their humiliation, I knew Marcus and Beverly were planning their next move. They couldn't help themselves. They had spent their entire lives manipulating the people around them, spinning lies to keep their image intact. They were delusional enough to think they could still win. I wasn't about to let them. Not this time. One night, I sat in my penthouse, sipping on a glass of wine, watching the Atlanta skyline from my balcony. It was a beautiful view, one that was mine and mine alone. It felt good to finally be free. But the freedom wasn't just about the penthouse or the money. It was about taking back control I had given up for too long. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Caldwell. He answered almost immediately. "What's the next step?" I asked, my voice calm but resolute. He sighed. "They're going to fight. Beverly's hired a new lawyer, and they're preparing to take this to federal court. They're claiming fraud, accusing you of everything under the sun. It's going to get ugly." I smirked. "Let them. I'm not backing down." "Are you sure you want to do this? There's no going back. If we push this, the public spectacle will be—" "Let them make a spectacle of themselves. I'm done being their punching bag. They've played the victim long enough. It's my turn now." I hung up and leaned back against the couch, staring out at the lights. It felt good to be in control again. I wasn't about to let them tear me down, not without taking them down with me. The next few days were filled with meetings with my legal team. We were preparing for the battle to come. I wasn't just fighting for the penthouse or the money anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for the life I had built, and for the justice I deserved. I wasn't going to let Marcus and Beverly walk away from this. They had lied, stolen, and manipulated their way to the top, and now they were going to pay the price. And then, just as I thought things couldn't get more dramatic, the phone call came. A high-powered lawyer from Beverly's new firm had reached out, demanding a settlement meeting. It wasn't just about the penthouse anymore. They wanted to try to fix their reputation. They wanted to save face in front of their wealthy friends and business partners. They knew they couldn't win in court, but they still thought they could get me to fold. I wasn't about to play their game anymore. I called Mr. Caldwell and told him to set up the meeting. When the day arrived, I dressed carefully, looking every bit the part of a woman who was done being underestimated. My suit was sharp, my hair neat and controlled, and my expression colder than ice. I wasn't here to talk about the past. I was here to close this chapter for good. Beverly, Marcus, and their new lawyer were already sitting at the conference table when I walked into the room. They had that familiar smugness on their faces, but it didn't take long for them to realize that I wasn't the same woman who had been married to Marcus. I took my seat, looked them each in the eye, and let them stew in their own nervous energy for a few moments. Beverly was the first to speak, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We want to resolve this peacefully," she said, her eyes flicking between me and Marcus. "We know things have gotten out of hand, but we think it's best for everyone if we settle." I gave her a thin smile. "Settle? You want to settle after everything you've done, after the lies, after the manipulation?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not expecting me to come at them this hard. But I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. "I'm not interested in settling, Beverly," I said, leaning forward slightly. "What I want is for you to finally take responsibility for your actions. For once, I want you to admit that everything you have, everything you've ever had, was built on a lie." There was a long silence. The tension in the room was suffocating. Marcus and Beverly exchanged a glance, and for the first time they both looked unsure of themselves. "I think you're mistaken," their lawyer piped up, trying to regain control of the situation. "We're offering a generous settlement. We want to avoid a lengthy court battle." I laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think a generous settlement is going to fix this? Let me tell you something. There's no settlement that will fix what you've done. You've manipulated people, stolen from me, and ruined lives. And now you want to fix it with money? That's cute." I stood up, ready to walk out, but before I did, I threw down the final piece of evidence, a file full of documents detailing Marcus's shady financial dealings, his illegal transfers, and his manipulation of the company's accounts. "Here's the truth, Marcus." I tossed the file onto the table, "and it's not going anywhere." The look on their faces said it all. They realized they were cornered. And now there was no way out. The room went completely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, but everything else was still. Marcus was the first to react, his hand trembling as he reached for the file I had just thrown onto the table. His face drained of color as he skimmed through the pages. Beverly's usual composure faltered for the briefest of moments, and I could see her trying to keep it together, but the cracks were showing. "Where did you get this?" Marcus stammered, his voice barely a whisper, panic creeping into his tone. "I got it from the same place I got everything else, Marcus," I said, a slow smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "The truth, and now it's all coming out. No more lies, no more pretending." Beverly looked up at me, her eyes full of fury, but there was no hiding the fear in them anymore. They both knew the game was up. The life they had built on lies, on manipulation, on theft was falling apart before their eyes. I don't understand," Beverly choked, her voice wavering for the first time. "You're really going to destroy us like this after everything we've done for you?" I tilted my head slightly, almost feeling sorry for her. "For me? You never did anything for me, Beverly. You did it for yourself, for your own image. You used me to keep up your perfect little world. But that world is gone now, and I'm not going to stand by while you destroy everything I've worked for." Marcus slammed the file down onto the table, his anger boiling over. "This isn't over, Naya," he spat, his face contorted in rage. "You think you've won? You haven't. This is just the beginning. You're going to regret this." I met his gaze calmly, unfazed by his threats. I'm not scared of you, Marcus, and I'm definitely not scared of your mother's money or connections. You can't intimidate me anymore. Not with your lies, not with your money, and not with your threats. You've already lost." The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He was broken, and Beverly, she was the last one holding on to any semblance of control, but even she was realizing that her kingdom had crumbled. I walked out of the room without another word. I had said everything I needed to say. They were done. Their lies would catch up with them, and there was nothing they could do to stop it now. A few weeks later, the media was abuzz. The Sterlings were finally exposed for the frauds they were. Their empire, built on a mountain of lies, had come crashing down. Marcus was facing multiple investigations for corporate fraud, and Beverly's carefully curated life of privilege was in ruins. As for me, I was exactly where I needed to be, stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever to never let anyone take advantage of me again. I had taken back control, and I wasn't looking back. This isn't just a story about one woman's revenge. It's about reclaiming your power when it feels like the world is against you. If you've ever been underestimated, used, or manipulated, it's time to take control of your life. Don't let anyone walk all over you. Stand up, speak your truth, and take back what's yours. Remember, your story isn't over. It's just getting started.